We're all people. Context really matters. And I feel a lot of experts and a lot of people just take context completely out of the equation. And they make these statements like, when you walk in a room, you should always smile. Like, no, you shouldn't always smile. Like, that's bad advice, especially if you're anxious and your smile timing is weird, because then people like, these topics are way more nuanced and way more and require more attention and care than most people are giving them.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. Welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for entrepreneurial thinkers. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, and today we are talking to Blake Eastman about unlocking the power of nonverbal cues. Now, if you haven't heard of Blake, here's a little bit about him. He, in 2009, founded the Nonverbal Group, which at the time was a New York City-based behavioral research and education company. Now he is in Austin, that conducts large-scale studies on human behavior and uses various technologies to systematically deconstruct and improve human communications. He has also served as adjunct professor at City University of New York for 6 years, teaching general psychology, development psychology, and group dynamics. He's a former professional poker player and founded School of Cards, the first brick-and-mortar poker school in New York City. Blake Eastman, welcome to FOMO Sapiens.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so as you know, I start every interview with the same question. And even you, who seemed like a really smart guy who could, smart me out of things, even you cannot escape me. The question is this: tell me something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything.
I think, well, first, the general concepts of blind spots, I think I intellectually always understood, even at a young age, but I didn't really see how they were sort of running my life. And I think seeing that, oh my God, something's called out or something's brought to my attention. And an example of this. So my father recently passed away from ALS. And when he first was diagnosed, I was talking to one of my friends and he was saying, do you have any like unresolved stuff with your family? I was like, no, I have like an incredible relationship with my family. And he's like, I don't mean about relationship, like things that are driving your behaviors that you're not aware of. And I've always, now I'm much better, but in my early entrepreneurial days, I was kind of like a lunatic where I would spend X and make a lot less than X and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And it would create these things where I'd make a lot of money and then I'd spend it and be in a tough spot, and make a lot of money and spend it and be in a tough spot. Just this recurring cycle that I didn't see. And we were doing some work talking about my dad. And I remember when I was like 11 years old, my dad lost his job. And it was the first time I felt like sort of palpable anxiety in the household. And I'm sitting there at the kitchen table with my father and I was like, what are we gonna do? And my dad, with such confidence, was like, oh, we'll be fine. Like, I'll get 3 jobs if I have to. Like, there's no way that anything's, like, you're totally good. And I was sort of seeing that I was kind of mimicking the relationship that my father had. Like, I was trying to be my dad, put myself in a tough financial spot, find my way out of it, put myself in and like normally like that's kind of woo. Like, I don't think that's a real thing. And the more I looked at it, the more it was. So I think that was a big driver, and just this whole concept that you have blind spots, that it's impossible for you to be aware of it.
Yeah, it's incredible how everybody else sees them and we don't. Mm-hmm. And then, you figure it out, and it's like, I used to think, I don't know, I guess I've evolved. I used to think like people who look back to their childhood were like, it's like, oh, you can't cop out on your parents for everything. But it doesn't have to be that. It's more like you do, when you're a kid, you imprint your brain with like these patterns of behavior and these patterns of thought, which, at the time maybe didn't have implications, but 20, 30 years later could be causing you to do things that aren't very helpful. And so, identify them.
Yeah. And on that point, it's not the moment that is so valuable. So people like, well, searching for the moment. It's the fact that post that moment, you've repeated that pattern for 30 years in ways that you're not aware of. And that's what leads to the more solidified behavioral change in the way that you're different in the world. So going back and understanding those moments and then doing the work just sort of just gain awareness of them is like the first step towards reducing the behavior.
Totally agree. Now, you have an interesting job. It's always nice to have somebody on who's a little, a little different, let's say.
A little
You're
creepy.
An expert in well, I mean, I'm just trying to behave myself right now and not make any weird facial expressions, but you're an expert in nonverbal communication. How does one get into that line of work?
That's a good question. So, started off, really, you get into this field by just doing it in a lot of ways. So academics study aspects of nonverbal behavior, social psychology in very controlled settings. One of the reasons I didn't go through academia or pursue that further was because I was frustrated by certain aspects of it, the red tape, I just wanted to fund things and get it done. So the truth is, it started with just like doing it. So I started a company. I started slowly but surely. If I were to go back and look at some of the things I said 15 years ago, I would cringe today. And that's what it all is. And I think like expert in nonverbal, I struggle with the term expert. So like I'm always in this, I don't think I'm ever going to be, I don't think there's such thing exists. I think it's like I'm always in the inquiry of understanding behavior at a more deeper level. And it's that process that gives me the value that I have to offer others. And I feel like the problem with a lot of body language consultants or people is the truth is they're just kind of dictating their narrative of the world. It's not reality. So like, oh, look right there. He moved his eyebrows and that means this and this, when there's really no research to suggest that. Studies don't suggest that. And I feel like this field of body language or nonverbal communication has gotten a really bad reputation because there's just so much silliness out there. Like 93% of communication is nonverbal. Well, like, no, it's not. It never was. That was one study done and regurgitated over and over and over again. Or if you touch your nose, you're lying. And the problem is those things change other people's perception. So then you're having you're on a date with someone that you really like and they say something and they rub their nose and you're like, oh my God, they're lying. And you see the world that way. So we're just all actively creating our own realities based on our past events and our past models for the world. And gaining a higher level of awareness is a critical aspect. But yeah, the truth is, and I had the psychology background and blah, 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 blah. But like, I started it. That's where most entrepreneurs get into it. They start it and they compound and they improve and they grow and they get better and better and better and better.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated because you're right. Like there are a number of industries like this where you have lots of truth and lots of knowledge, but then there are a lot of like shenanigans that are played. And all of a sudden people, in order to have like a book out there or to get on TV or whatever, just to have their like TEDx talk, kind of come up with their little thing and then they run around with it and promote the heck out of it. And then all of a sudden it becomes the law. And and we end up with these paradigms or heuristics that are completely disconnected from reality.
Exactly. It's
so
like there's so much of that. Like The Cup, how to change your life, relationship, and business by understanding the cup methodology. And then they'll find like all of the evidence that supports this claim. And the truth is, like, psychology, whenever you're studying human behavior, there's so much variance and drift amongst person to person that any specific numbers are never really true. 33%, 22%, 50%. We're all people. Context really matters. And I feel a lot of experts and a lot of people just take context completely out of the equation. And they make these statements like, when you walk in a room, you should always smile. Like, no, you shouldn't always smile. Like, that's bad advice, especially if you're anxious and your smile timing is weird, because then people are, like, these topics are way more nuanced and way more and require more attention and care than most people are giving them.
Yeah, I like that. So be skeptical going in. Now,
so
I'm not going to call you an expert.
Yeah.
But I'm going to call you an expert.
Okay.
Let's just in quotes everybody.
Yeah,
but like,
expert.
This is what you do. You certainly much more expert than a lot. Vast majority of people.
For sure.
FOMO. Let us talk about this topic. Like what should we know about nonverbal communication? Give us the primer.
I've never been asked that question. What should we know? Okay, that's a great question. So what we should know is that, like, back to what I said before, what's happening is nonverbal behavior. So let's say there's channels of information in the human body. I could say what I'm saying, right? Like right now I'm talking, and when I'm talking, there's something called prosody, or the prosodic aspects of my vocal tone. And so I could say like, oh, that was a really good question, versus, right? Or that was a really good question. And I could morph or shift the meaning of what I'm saying, right? And the key word here is meaning. The truth is, all I'm doing is making sounds, making gestures, and making movements. But society perceives those things to be a certain way. So most of what my work is, it's not about deducing meaning, it's about deducing perception. So for example, I can predict with our machine learning models and my other company, behavioral robotics, with a very high accuracy, who on a team is the least likely to be liked based on facial expressions. And it's like, so what am I looking for? I'm looking for something called social coordination, which is something you did just now. You nodded your head. So you nodded your head, showing me that you're paying attention to me. You nodded your head. If you were watching a video of me, you wouldn't nod your head. You did it for me to amplify that sort of informational channel. I know that there's a trend specifically in certain cultures that if you have a low level of facial coordination, you're not giving the other person indications that you're paying attention. Therefore, people make their own meaning out of what that means. So for example, you're talking about something important to you, and I'm just looking at you with a stoic face like this. And most people don't say stoic face. They go, oh my God, they're not interested. That person's kind of an asshole. That person's kind of this.
Yeah, they got RBF.
They got RBF. I mean, RBF is a real thing, but it doesn't mean the person's a bitch or an asshole or whatever the word is.
Resting bitch face.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
What it really means is that there's a societal perception that if you have this facial configuration, it's going to be perceived that way. So crossing your arms, if you say something and I make a weird face and cross your arms, I could have loved what you said and it could have been cold. But there's a perceptual bell curve here in terms of the meaning that's going on. The problem about nonverbal behavior is it's a bell curve. It doesn't always mean everybody's going to see the same thing, which is why you can take one person, put them on stage, and have 85% of the people say, that was one of the best presentations I've ever seen. And 15% of the people say, that person's an idiot. And you're like, oh, that's a weird variability amongst all of those things. And it's because we all see the world slightly differently.
Wow. So knowing that is going on, what are the big things that we can do? Whether it's certain things we can practice doing or some things we can sort of be aware not to do that can position us to, convey a more powerful, effective presence in the world.
So it's a massively deep rabbit hole, but I'll tell you the easiest tip is owning the context. So what we do is we look at behavior within a context, and then we're rapidly solving for the reason for why the behavior is occurring. So for example, like if me and you were on a Zoom meeting right now, and I was taking notes, and I just got this new iPad, and I'm constantly taking notes. You don't have context that I'm taking notes. So all you know is you're speaking, and I'm constantly looking away and looking at you and looking. So you invent a narrative. The way that I solidify your perspective of me is say, listen, I'm going to be taking some notes right now. So if I look over to this other screen, I apologize. I just want to really hear what you're saying. So a lot of the time we under-communicate. We should be over-communicating to own the narrative about how people perceive us.
Interesting. So say, for example, I'm just trying to think. I walk into the room. I'm not smiling. I don't feel good. I could say, listen, I just want to let you know, I just had a really weird meeting. Give me a second. Let me come back. I mean, would that be the kind of just give context on how you're presenting yourself to the world? Yeah, so this
is where it gets so nuanced. This is why I love human behavior. And there are cultures for sure that is the right way to go. For sure, if your face is looking a certain way and you have an open culture about collaboration and everybody's connected and all that, there are other cultures where that gets perceived as weakness. Right, so that you can't.
Russia,
certain, not even cultures relative on a geographical level. Cultures relative on a company level, right?
Sure.
So there's companies in New York City. We can throw a rock, hit two different companies, and have two entirely different cultures of what's accepted and what's not accepted. So those things work, but you want the context to be contained inside of the culture and be aware of the culture that you're in, or else you end up shooting yourself in the foot. So, but it is true, yeah. I think, but if you were to have to, if you had a choice in 2023 or 2024 actually, if you had a choice right now, say in New York City, to either over communicate about how your state is or under communicate, I would go with over for sure. Like if I had to choose one or the other. But the truth is, the real edge or the real skill set comes from being able to understand that nuance.
I see. And what about, so for example, there's talking about the sort of conventional wisdom in this field.
Mm-hmm.
I read this book that my dad saw on Fox News that was like the commercial or the woman spoke. And so he gave it to me for Christmas and I read it. And it was things like, whenever you're standing, never cross your hands in front of each other because it looks defensive, and always have one hand in a pocket and have an open stance. Like all these kinds of things. Always smile and nod your head in approval. And so I kind of practice some of those things and adopt. Like I do think that, like when I'm on a stage giving a talk, I'm always like, don't cross your hands in front of each other. It's going to look defensive. Like, are some of those things, in the research you've seen, are they worth learning, or like how should we think about that stuff?
Anytime anybody in this field says the word always or never, it's probably wrong. It's just not true. It's just not grounded in fact, right? The truth is, it depends on how you want to be perceived. And a lot of these things are just like, my answer to this is multifaceted. So one, even if, let's say you read on a book the best advice ever about nonverbal behavior, and it was really nuanced. It was really, I want you to smile with the right timing and I want you to do it. And it was great. You still wouldn't be able to execute what the author of the book was intending because it's written word and not physical behavior. It's very difficult to learn, and it's why we use video recording for everything we do, because if you tell someone you're coming across weird because of your smile timing, and they're like, what are you talking about? But if you show them a video of it, it's that. So first, it's the medium. The best medium for understanding behavior is observing behavior, and it's video. And then the second thing is, most of the time, you're just dealing with people's preferences that are sort of argued as fact. If you were to look at most of the studies that people reference and actually read them, they're like, oh, that was a study done on 8 people at the University of Washington. And the lead on that study said, this was just an exploratory study, and obviously it doesn't, but they leave those parts out. And the problem is they speak with such confidence, such assertion, and people believe it. And then they think they need to be that way. The truth is, you should be optimizing for, on a stage at least, presentation-wise, for being as comfortable as you possibly feel and feeling present and feeling there. Because the truth is, a presentation is not about you, it's about your audience. And if you're so hyper-focused about coming across a certain way, you're unlikely to connect with that audience. So I'm big on step one, doing the work necessary to get to that. And then step two, understanding certain things like, maybe you move around a little bit more. And it's all nuanced. I'll give you a perfect example. I work with a D1 athlete on a presentation. I can't believe I haven't told this story in years. D1 athlete took my presentation class in New York City and was very anxious. And I gave him the advice of, start off with one hand in your pocket and walk on stage and just gesture with the other. And if it makes you feel safe, it makes you feel comfortable, no problem. And I do it sometimes too, not a big deal. So he starts doing that, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, you look real, like, what is it? Like, something looks off. And I say to him, something looks off. And he goes, I can't believe you said that. And he takes his arms out, and like his left arm was like a solid 6 inches larger than his right. Like he didn't have symmetry in his arms. I was like, that is the weirdest thing. He's like, it's kind of weird. So when he was sticking his left hand in his pocket, it just looked lanky and like something was off. So it was just like a nuanced example of that piece of advice working. So there are tips, and you need to take tips. You need to try them on. You need to figure out what works for you before being like, this is a maxim and I have to do this every single time. Never cross. And if you tell people a list, if you have somebody do a presentation, that's one of the things I hate about vocal fillers. Like people try to say, don't say don't say don't say like. When you tell people and you optimize for that, it gets their energy focused on not saying ums and likes and all that. And the truth is, ums, likes, all those vocal fillers, there's a deeper source on why you're saying that. So people will have those vocal fillers when they're not comfortable, when they're not maybe necessarily prepared, or it's just a byproduct of their speech patterns. Just gotta be very careful the information you take in, because some of it is just It's just not true. It's not grounded in real reality. It can be helpful, but it can be harmful as well.
I really like that you talk about the video, because early in my career, when I was starting to do television, I went to a coach in England, actually, and Catherine was her name, and she taped me, and her husband was like an actor, and so we made pretend we were like on a talk show, and he was interviewing me, and she taped it, and we watched it back, and she looked at me, and she said, "Patrick, you look dead behind the eyes." And I did.
Yeah.
And I had never seen that because I was always, I'm an affable, outgoing guy. And and just seeing that one time was an unlock for me that had changed everything going forward. And it really, from then it's been, a lot of learning. But I just think that it's a very simple thing to do, but it does make a huge difference. And you're right. It kind of makes me laugh to think about the conventional wisdom in the studies. I read psychology studies about FOMO all the time, and I'm always amazed at your point. You're like, oh, they got 13 undergraduates of University of whatever Slovakia who filled out a form 3 days in a row, and now they're making an assertion that of something. So it's about finding your level of comfort, finding the thing that works for you, and then making sure it's not off-putting to other people, obviously, and getting feedback on that. But when we're looking at other people, when we're in a negotiation, when we're having a conversation with somebody, when we're coaching somebody, that kind of stuff, how can we do better to read what's going on with them in terms of nonverbal?
So everybody hates this answer to this question, but it's very complex and a lot of work. But before you do any of that work, before you do any of that actual work, you have to confront your own biases and your own defaults. If you tell someone if somebody really wants to be liked, and you start teaching them little things that people do when they like you, they're going to over-index and see those things more or less in social interactions. So your lens or your glasses for the world are so biased that you have to notice your own levels of bias and your own levels of issues before you could ever get remotely close to reading. And there is no such thing as reading. This is the cool thing. You can't actually ever read body language. You could only predict it. You can't read. It's impossible. If I were to ask you, hey, how you feeling right now? You couldn't even articulate it. You're going to use language. You're like, I don't know. I feel kind of good. I feel alive. This is interesting. I'm enjoying myself. And I'd be like, tell me more how you feel. It might take 30 minutes to get to the point of how you really feel. So things like feelings and emotions are such abstract, interesting concepts. And then I, not knowing anything about you, is going to look at you and see you smiling and be like, oh, he likes me. Or, oh, he's happy. A smile does not mean you're happy. It means your face is constructed in a way that is perceived from society as being pleasant or whatever the term is. That's why the research and science behind emotion is so crazy. And these are really big themes. And so you only can get better at predicting, and you'll never get perfect. That would be the only way to get perfect is if I was able to somehow see every single neural mechanism, every single system of the body, and exactly what's happening at every single time. And unfortunately, when it comes to research, it shows that there's a lot of variability. So if two people are angry, you would expect that their brains look very similar. They don't. It's not perfect one-to-one representation. There's a lot of difference. So, and that's the reason why that emotions get so complex. Emotions are really constructs. They're words, they're labels that describe an internal experience. One of the tips I always tell people is never communicate with, or see, I said never. Bad expert. Try not to use one word to communicate emotion. You want to use 3. So, for example, if you said, Blake, how you doing? Get on the podcast before. How you doing, Blake? And I said, I'm just really tired. And that's it? That's all I give you? Where does the other person go from there? Right? It's just hard to go back and forth. Yeah, take a nap, Blake.
We'll meet tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Versus if you're talking to your spouse and it's I'm 30% disappointed, I'm 50% frustrated, and I'm 20% just a little sad. They can relate to you better because of that emotional vernacular. So expanding your vocabulary in terms of how you describe your experience of yourself and others is such a powerful way to get better connected to and understand other humans.
That's super interesting. I really like that approach, and I will start using it. FOMO. I am curious, like, I've read and about the micro expressions thing where like there are 9 micro expressions and like people do them in a millisecond and you can like train to read them. And that's the key to unlocking what people are really thinking. Do you buy into that? Your face says probably not.
See, good prediction. So my face is a mixture of, I'll tell you right now.
See, I did read your micro expression.
So you did. It wasn't a micro, it was probably a macro, but like it's a whole other thing. So my face was a mixture of, one, how to answer this question like in a short, because it's very convoluted and complicated. Okay. But let me break it down. So one, are micro expressions real? 100%. Yes, they are. They are things that actually occur. Are the basis and the way companies or people are training them and using them the most efficient or make sense? No. So if you, like a lot of the micro expression training is like showing a facial configuration and being like, oh, let me look for that. It's not how it works. It's it's kind of similar to emotional intelligence, where you take like an emotional intelligence test and on paper you're good at emotional intelligence, then you go out in the real world and everything's terrible. So I think of I would not tell most people to spend any time focusing on micro expressions. I think that would be a wasted effort for life. I think it's interesting. It's really so cool, but there's not that.
You just give me permission, because I felt FOMO around it. I was like, well, that would be cool. But then I was thinking, and I think what I'm hearing from you, tell me if I'm summarizing kind of what is that. This is a very complex thing. It's about us being aware of ourselves and others and being more mindful of that. But to be reductive and think that somehow you can then apply these rules on top of things is really to miss the point of the exercise. Is that right?
Very well said. Yeah. And it's not only missing the point of the exercise, you're going in the wrong direction. Yeah. So I've done that for people. People have been like, Blake, I just need a quick thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, just so we're on the same page. This is not the best way to go about it, but this will help. There are tips that for sure help. I do think that we spend so much time in our lives working on all these other things, whether it's working out, which is so important, and working on our abilities to write or design or whatever it is. But the amount of work and time dedicated towards actually building skills that help us more powerfully deal with people is nowhere near some of those other things. Like, why aren't in high school kids taught like a people class, or even in college and even in medicine? I work in medicine a lot. Like, doctors are not trained on how to interact with patients. They might have like 1 class or 2 class. It's not something that's drilled in. And I think by reducing the complexity of human behavior to tips, you're missing the true beauty of people and the path to connect and have a life. And the way I think of it is this. You want to think about your people interactions, and wherever the key word is suffering. Wherever you feel like you're suffering with someone, it's a point or something where you can learn. So if you're about to walk into a room and you're so afraid that you're going to say something wrong, that's suffering. If you go to a cocktail event or a networking event and you're like, I do not want to do this, that's suffering. And there's all these tools to re-anchor and restructure how you experience the world. And I think those things are a better approach.
Yeah, not everything's a hack. I think that's what I'm hearing here.
Yeah. And there are great hacks in life, but when it comes to people, not everything's a hack.
All right, Blake, you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. By the look on your face, which I'm not assuming I am. Look at the smile. There, I got a smile. There we go. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Number 1. What is a favorite quote?
Oh God, this is so bad. So it's by Bill Cosby.
Hard, right? Okay. Oh no.
I don't know the key to success, but the key to failure is trying to please everyone.
Yeah, and he didn't in the end. But yeah, I mean, this is tough to do.
I had to answer honestly, but it's Bill Cosby came to mind,
It is a really good quote. Even though, and it's
bad people can say good things. We'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Or people that have done bad things can say good things.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Although he was, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
Number 2, name one book or podcast every FOMO Sapien should know about.
Oh, that's a good question. Book Behave by Robert Sapolsky. It's a great book in just a really nuanced, but not to the point of being annoying. Like, he's good at explaining complex things in a way that's way more digestible. And if you really want to learn some of the inner mechanisms of how you work and how you interact with people, I think that's a great book. Podcasts, that's tough. I don't know how to. I would say Dan Carlin's Hardcore History.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. So which I think he stopped doing, but I found that podcast getting me just very interested again in diving into history with his level of enthusiasm and delivery was really good.
All right. One piece of advice you give to your younger self.
Hire coaches, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I always have like at least 2 or 3 coaches in my life. I think I would have been at a completely different place in my life if I would have had coaches at the age of like 21.
I know. It's funny. I was talking to somebody today, a coaching client, and they said, my friend was like, you don't need a coach. And I was like, that person has never had a coach. Because until you have one who's good and you're like, you see the, yeah.
Yeah. And also
100%.
you can't see your own blind spots. It's just not possible.
Yeah. I don't even know. I mean, listen, I used to kind of be more, and now I'm like, whoa, I would love to carry a coach around in my pocket all day. 4, what's your most important memory?
That's a really good question. Probably something along, I don't know the exact memory, but with my dad, just because him passing was like one of the hardest things and one of the best gifts to me. Just it had me appreciate life in a different way. And like probably when he first got his diagnosis. So it was one of the hardest memories, but one of the best memories.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Fascinating guy. If you want to learn more about Blake and his work, head over to nonverbalgroup.com. Blake Eastman, founder of Nonverbal Group. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks for having me. Great questions.
FOMO. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com.